Our premier corporate underwriter, one of our sponsors, is Sheridan Press. Sheridan Press prints our magazine. Bates Creative is a corporate partner. They do the cover design for the magazine. Imagination sponsored some things at the annual meeting. And today's sponsors are Naylor Association Services and Picture This Video. And we have a couple of minutes for them to introduce themselves and their organizations to the group before we get started. First off is John Kilchenstein of Naylor. John?
Thank you for your time today. We appreciate the opportunity to sponsor today's video on a budget. My name is John Kilchenstein from Naylor Association Solutions, and this is Aaron Weisberg. And for those of you who don't know, at a high level, Naylor provides a wide range of solutions for associations with really three key goals: to help build a more powerful association, to improve member engagement, as well as drive non-dues revenue. And our 5 solutions today are career, events, we have an AMS, we also have learning solutions, and our communication solutions, which Aaron and I represent. And our association advisor brand, we do a benchmarking survey each year, and Aaron has a few stats from what we've learned this year from over the 700 association executives who took the survey and responded about some of the video questions we had.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having us. My name is Aaron Weisberg, lead sales and project manager for Association TV, which is our Naylor's video content production and management system. So I work with all the associations on their video platforms and their projects. What John was alluding to earlier about the benchmarking survey that we did, 700 associations, about half of which have integrated video currently into their communications, another quarter of which are planning on integrating in the near future video communications. However, some of the metrics in the survey on the other end of how the members are interacting with the video content and how the associations are finding their return on investment from their video platforms are a little bit lower than we'd like to see, and that's what our responsibility is, to help the associations bring those numbers up. So thank you again for having us, and we're looking forward to the presentations.
Thank you.
Yes, Naylor is providing the lunch that we're having today and providing the video, which will be posted online soon if you want to review the session. And for people who couldn't make it here today, is Picture This Video. And Sharon Sobel, would you come up and chat for a minute about your organization?
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. My company's been in business since 1997, and we focus on corporate and educational video, whether it's events or training messages, training programs similar to this. I do this a lot. And actually, it was interesting to hear what Naylor does, because they kind of fill in the puzzle piece that I'm always missing, and that is, I've made a great video for you. Now you need somewhere to put it and someone to track the marketing and the audience. So that's great that they're here too. I know that there's going to be a lot of great information from these guys, but one thing I just want to say is anybody that comes with the idea of making video, the whole idea of video on a budget is very interesting, because if you don't have a budget, you probably should not even be considering video. It's not that you need a huge budget, but you need something there. Basically, anyone, whether it's yourself or a company like mine, can work within a budget, but you've got to start with a number. It's sort of like buying a house. I don't like it when people come and say, I want to make a video, how much is that going to cost? That's like going to a realtor and saying, I want to buy a house, how much is that going to cost? Think of it the same way. Figure out what your number is, and then that company or yourself, after this great session, will be able to tie that down to understand what that video is going to look like based on your budget. that's it. If you guys want to learn more about me, I've got business cards outside on the table. But thank you very much for having me.
Let's thank our sponsors.
That was a lot of really good stuff. Thank you. That was nicely done. I wanted to add one thing to what Brandon said. I didn't want to interrupt because he was going so well. He had a lot of great stuff there. He was talking about planning for video projects. What I was taught and what's been my experience is that there's 3 stages of producing a video. There's pre-production, production, and post-production. Production is when you turn the camera on. Post-production is all the editing that you do afterwards. Pre-production is everything that comes before you turn the camera on. How much time do you think you normally spend on pre-production? Just spit something out. 5%, 10%? Go ahead, somebody guess. Go ahead. 40%? Anybody else have a guess? What? 20%. Okay. In my experience and what I've been told, it's normally like 70%. So 2/3 of the project happens before you ever turn the camera on. And I think that gets to Brandon's point about planning the project. And also that gives you the opportunity to build a story and develop the story and to kill the story if the story is not any good. So that's just something to think about. All right, I got excited. This is sensitive. All right, so if I were you, I'd be asking, why should I listen to this guy up here in the jacket with no tie? I'll tell you about myself real quick. I have a weird communications background. It's unusually broad. I started in print publishing. I did every job in print publishing other than selling ads and doing circulation. I had no interest in those, by the way. I'm a professional photographer. I'm an award-winning magazine editor, and I'm a multimedia producer. I don't know anybody else who is crazy enough to do all 3 of those at the same time. I started doing multimedia in 2004 when I was a magazine editor. I bought a video camera and a laptop. I spent $4,000 out of my own pocket, and I started learning this stuff on my own. And as a magazine editor, I started producing videos and slideshows to augment the articles I was doing. Then I went into multimedia full-time. I've been doing it 8 years. I've been in communications for 26 years, mostly in associations. In between jobs right now, I'm doing freelance, and that's my story. Why do you want to save money on video? Well, video is expensive. Everybody knows that. It's the most expensive option you can pursue as far as I'm concerned. So my advice for you today is don't focus just on spending less money. Focus on spending wisely. Because if you spend wisely, you're getting something for your money. You're going to spend, no matter what you do. So make sure that you get your money's worth when you're doing it. Mm-hmm. There we go. This is like doing my TV at home. Yeah, right. I should close my eyes then. So focus your efforts. We've talked about how to produce video. There's ways to produce video more cheaply or more expensively. You can save 5%, 10%, whatever it is. There's a lot of good things you should do when you're producing your video to try and reduce your costs. From my perspective, the most important thing you can do from a cost perspective and an effectiveness perspective is the strategy. And that's going to help you decide whether you should do a video or not. You know, Brandon was talking about killing the story. You've heard the phrase, fail early, right? If you can fail before you even start, that's the best thing, because you haven't lost anything. So a good strategy is going to help you figure out if you should make a video. And then if you couple that with good thoughts on how to do it effectively, you've really saved yourself time and money. Because if you've decided ahead of time not to do a video that's a bad video, you've saved 100% of your cost. And if you've learned how to do video effectively and cost effectively, but you still make a bad video, you've saved 5 or 10%, but everything you spent is wasted. So video is expensive, and the way I like to think of it is think of it as a limo versus Uber, right? Uber, they're both used to take people places. Uber's great for certain things. You want to go to the grocery store, Uber's terrific. You want to take a limo to the grocery store, I want to go to the grocery store with you because you got a lot of money and you're going to pay for my grocery bills. It's kind of like surf and turf versus a hamburger too, right? A hamburger you can get any day. Surf and turf is something special. It's more top of the line. You're going to go out and have that on a special event. And you don't necessarily want the $5 surf and turf because you might not feel so good afterwards. So get the surf and turf that makes sense, right? Spend wisely. So all of this flows from strategy. If you develop a good strategy, you're going to make good decisions. From my perspective, you do 3 things. You examine your communications options, you examine your audience, and you examine your production options. So, I'm using the force, it's not working. There we go. Here's topics of communication types that I've arranged by cost. So at the bottom, it's less expensive. At the top, it's most expensive. You can pursue any of these options in ways that will move them up and down. If you come to me and say, hey, I'd like a slideshow, and it has to have the #1 top 40 song in the country today, I'll say, great, that's going to shoot right up to the top of the list. Other than that, this is a good starting point. Video is the most expensive option. Text is the least expensive option. One of the reasons that video is expensive is there's a lot of logistics involved, there can be travel, but it's also complicated, it's complex. You can make a video that has all of those other communication elements wrapped up in it. So a video can be an amalgam of everything else. So think about all the work that can go into that. That's a complicated project. All right, so how can you cut costs? Don't pay for a video if a cheaper option will work just as well. So I'll go back for a second. Remember that there's all these other options. If there was the option to write a text story and to have it work just as well as the bad video you're going to make, wouldn't you rather do that and save all the money? I think you would. So you have to figure out how to avoid that, right? All those options, it's a toolbox. You have a box full of tools at your disposal, and your job is to pick the right tool for the job. Now, the thing is, when you wake up on a Saturday morning, if you do any work around the house, you probably look around and you say, oh, that door is coming off the hinges. What tools do I need to fix it? I don't know anybody who wakes up and says, today I'm going to use a wrench, because that's backwards. But guess what? That happens all the time in video production. People come to me all the time and they say, we need a video. I'll say, okay, great. Let's talk about what you're trying to accomplish. Video may or may not be the right thing, but don't decide ahead of time. I always talk to people about what's your goal? What's your audience? What's your message? And maybe video is the right tool for that, and maybe it's not. But don't start by picking the tool first, because if you do, you put yourself in a position where you're not going to use the tool very well. And if you're trying to drive in a nail with a wrench, you're kind of wasting your time.
Well, you can do it. I've done it.
I think you're more likely to bang your thumb. But so if you use video when you don't need to, you're going to waste your money. You're going to waste your time. The best way to save money is not to waste it, is to make a good decision up front. So when is video the right tool? Video is inherently expensive, but video has inherent advantages as a communications tool. And here are some of the ones that I could think of. Scale. If you want to capture scale, if you want to show an audience how large your exhibit hall is, video is great for that. You can get up high and pan the camera across. You can send a drone across and get an aerial shot. That's pretty good. Really hard to show scale on just a still photograph. Motion, right? There's a reason that people pay for the NFL package and the MLB package on TV. Motion's great, right? TV and motion, capturing sports, there's no better way to show motion than video. Emotion, and think about the video that Brandon showed. That's really powerful. That's incredibly powerful. It's if you sit down with somebody and they start to get emotional about something, and their voice softens, and their eyes start to well up, and their voice starts to crack. That's powerful. If they start to get angry and their eyes get lit up on fire, and you can tell, you know that instantly. If I sit down and interview somebody and they start to get mad, I have to write, and Joe Blow's eyes lit up like he was on fire. It's not quite the same thing, not quite as powerful. Video is very informal, and that can lead to quicker communication sometimes. Sometimes it's easier to describe something when you don't have to be quite so formal about it. It's very intimate. For 2 years, I created and produced an online video news show, and we got to interview some very interesting people like Tom Brokaw and Ariana Huffington and Tony Hsieh, who's the CEO of Zappos. Most people are never going to get to be in the same room with Tom Brokaw. When you look at our video, the camera's 10 feet away. That means you're 10 feet away. That means you are in the room with Tom Brokaw. Now that's pretty cool. That's a level of intimacy that most of us are never going to have. Credibility. Credibility is really plays on video very well, in my opinion. If you're trying to do a testimonial where people are saying, we love your organization's products and services, it goes to another level if they're on video, because they're putting themselves out there. You look at my face, you look at my name, I'm going to tell you this is a great product. That counts. And the last thing is two-channel communication. And I think that this gets undervalued quite a bit. What's two-channel communication? With a video, you can see and hear at the same time. That seems really simple. It's not the least bit simple. It's really, really powerful. Two-channel communication, one of the reasons it's so powerful is it matches up really well with how people think and learn. So one of the things I did in the last few months was read a book by Ruth Colvin Clark, I believe her name is, and it's about e-learning. And in that book, what it turns out is your brain is like a computer. And in a computer, when you start typing, you're using RAM, random access memory. And that's what the computer is using to process and to do whatever it needs to do. You hit the save button, it goes to the hard drive. And your brain works much the same way. So when you're thinking right now about what I'm saying, hopefully you're thinking about what I'm saying, you're using your RAM, you're using your working memory. And your RAM, your working memory, just like your RAM, is limited. When you learn something, it gets saved to your long-term memory. Your working memory is really limited. And you probably know how limited it is already. Because the most that most people can learn or remember at one time is 7 things. If I give you a list with 7 things and I give you number 8, number 1's probably going to fall out of your head. That's your working memory. That's how small it is. It's not really big. So if you're trying to get people to learn and to understand and to absorb your content, that's the limit of what you're working with. That's called cognitive load. Well, it turns out that your working memory has 2 channels. It has an oral channel and a visual channel. So guess what? When you're making a good video, you're using both of those channels at the same time. You're making it as easy as possible for someone to absorb your content and to learn it. So that's one of the reasons that you use video, is to get people to understand and absorb your content. Now, do people usually do this? Not always. So what's wrong with this picture? This is a still frame from a video that appeared on the USA Today website last fall. So there was a written article and then this video, and this gentleman appeared in both. He's a cab driver, and the story he tells in this video is that he lived close into the city. Housing prices got too expensive, he had to move out. When he did, his commuting costs went up, his commuting time went up, he spends less time with his family. It's not good. So they decided, let's do a video with him. That's what he says in the video. There are thousands of frames in this video. I can tell you what's wrong with it by showing you one. Where's the visual information? When I listen to this video, I can hear this guy talk. I get his words. I have nothing to look at. It's a guy in a car. There's a second shot, to be fair. There's a second camera. But it's nothing more than a guy sitting in a car. Now, unlike the video that Brandon showed us, where the gentleman has the emotion and he's talking about being in World War II, and that's powerful, this is a guy telling a story in his car. There's no difference, in my opinion, between that video and a written text article. I don't get anything more out of that video than I could get by reading online and he said this and this and this and this and this. So what did USA Today do? They paid for 2-channel communication. They got 1. They wasted their money. So what could you do in this situation? Guess what? This is the most mobile worker on the planet. He works in a car. So what do? If it was me, in retrospect, retrospect's good, I'd say, let me meet you at your old house at 4 o'clock. I'd say, tell me about your house. I'm going to interview you. I'd say, what's around here that you like? Is there a park? Is there walking distance to restaurants, to stores? I'd film the house, I'd film the restaurants, I'd film the neighborhood. I'd say, great, now it's 4:30, it's 5 o'clock. I want to get in the car, I want to pay your fare, I want you to drive me to your new house in rush hour. And I'm going to stick the camera out the window, I'm going to see how many people cut you off. I'm going to see how many people flip you the bird and honk at you and make your drive miserable. And when I report this, I'm going to say how long it took you to make that drive. And when we get to the new house, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did at the old house. I'm going to put you out front and tell me about this neighborhood. And when the viewer looks at it, the viewer is going to hear him talking about the neighborhood and see the neighborhood at the same time. We're not going to see a car. We're going to see the house. We're going to see everything that he's talking about. That's 2-channel communication. Does that take more time and more money? Absolutely. Is it a better video? Absolutely. Is it worth the money? That's a judgment call. That's a judgment call that somebody has to make. My opinion is that what they did is worth nothing. That I would rather not do that video at all, or do the nicer video. But this is an in-between that's a waste. So what's the silver lining here? Well, remember who produced this. This was USA Today. USA Today has more money than you do, and more money than you, and more money than you, and probably everybody in this room put together. So it's not always about resources, right? You can have all the resources in the world and throw them out the window and waste them, and you're not going to do anything. It's about strategy. That means you, as a smaller organization, can outperform USA Today and everyone else who doesn't know how to make video if you're smart. Well, so how are you smart? I think a couple questions to ask are, in addition to the ones I went through before, if your video has emotion, if it has intimacy, if it has scale, those are things, if you're capturing that, you're on the right track. In terms of two-channel communication, if your video does not make good use of two-channel communication, does it really need to be a video? Or is it the equivalent of a guy sitting in a car talking? Even if it does make good use of two-channel communication, does it still need to be a video, or is there a cheaper alternative? And Brandon was talking a little earlier about using a slideshow instead of a video. Guess what? Slideshows and motion graphics, remember this? Slideshows and motion graphics are two other forms of communication that also offer the option for two-channel communication. So if you need to do two-channel communication, you can do video. Consider that as an option. If you don't have the money to do video, think about motion graphics and slideshows. Now, if you don't know what motion graphics are, it's anything that moves. Type, graphics, images. When you watch the evening news and there's that stripe that shows up and it says, "This is Jane Doe, president of the Kill a Mouse Company," that's a motion graphic. Motion graphics you can add audio to. Slideshows you can add audio to. One of the best projects I ever did was one of the first projects I ever did. It was a group of volunteers for our association who were in New Orleans for a conference, and they volunteered to clean up a park. And they asked me if we shoot some video. I had a crew down there. I said, sure. But I also walked around with an SLR, and I took pictures. And ahead of time, I knew what the story was, and I composed some music on my guitar, and I recorded it, and I did an audio interview with somebody, and I used the audio interview and the music, and I put the whole thing together, and in some ways, the photos, because they're a snapshot in time, were actually more powerful than the video. And that worked really well. And there was no video cost involved. So, all right, well, I think we already analyzed our communication options. That was supposed to be struck out. So now let's look at the audience. So does your video match up well with how your audience thinks and processes information? And now we're talking about the brain again. How do you know? Well, another thing that I've done in the last few months, I did a lot of reading in the last few months. It was a pretty good investment of time. Something I came across is a guy named Howard Gardner, who's a professor of psychology at Harvard University. And back in the 70s, everyone said there's one form of intelligence, and he said, well, not so sure. He did some research, and he came up with 9. Now, for today's purposes, I just want you to focus on 4, 5, and 6. What these are, this is how people process information. It's not how they prefer to receive it. It's once information gets into their brain, it's how they deal with it. So people have linguistic intelligence, right? These are people who think in words. This is the most common form of intelligence there is, because most of us get information by reading or by talking to other people, and that's how you get words. There's visual spatial intelligence, people who see the world in 3 dimensions, and people who process information visually and graphically. And there's people with interpersonal skills, with interpersonal intelligence. Those are people who read other people well. All right, what do you do with that? Well, Gardner and other people have connected these types of intelligence to jobs. And that's actually useful for associations way more than anybody else. Because at USA Today, they have 1 billion people who watch their products, read their stuff, have all kinds of jobs. You people usually have a much better sense for what kind of jobs your audience is doing. So if we were going to do a quick analysis of AM&P, you've got 3 primary audience members, let's say, writers, editors, graphic artists, and salespeople. If you were going to look at how to do communications for this group, you would use the force and change the slide. And then you would say, people with linguistic intelligence, those are journalists, those are your writers and editors. They think with words. The graphic artists think visually and spatially. The salespeople, guess what? They have very good interpersonal skills. Well, what do you do with that? If you take all of your communications options, run them down the side of a chart, an increasing cost, and you run your audience options across the bottom, what can you do? Find where they intersect. So the writers and editors, there we go. The writers and editors think in words. How do you communicate words to an audience? Text or audio? Now, the nice thing is you're not stuck with one or the other, right? Either one might work. So you can choose the least expensive option. So the next thing is, oops, I jumped ahead. We'll stay there. Graphic artists. These are people who think visually. I left the text gray because that's probably how you're already communicating with them. And as I said, that's the most common form of intelligence, so they're probably already reading. You're not going to throw that away. But their preference is visual material. And so that's what you use. You communicate with photos, graphics, slideshows, motion graphics, and video. And your salespeople, they actually want to interact with others personally. But in mass communication, you can't really do that, so let's give them audio and video because that's the best we can do. Now, there's a couple things here. One of them is, if you were not providing any visual information to your graphic artists, you're underserving them, right? Because that's how they prefer to process information. It's easier for them to receive and process information when it's visual. So you're not helping them out if you're all that you're giving them is text. The flip side of that is, think about it from a budget standpoint. If I have $100 to spend on video, and I spend 90 of it on producing video for my writers and editors, is that a good use of money? It's probably not, because they're already happy with text. And text is the cheapest thing that I can do. So they might like the video. Now, if it was my decision, I wouldn't say that I'm never going to produce video for the writers and editors, because look back at the aspects of a good story, right? Look back at scale and emotion and intimacy. If the video conveys that story well, then I would think about using the video for the editors. But I'm not going to spend that much money on the editors because they probably don't even care. They're probably already satisfied with the text. Now flip it around again. Let's say I'm going to produce content for my graphic artists, and it's going to be specifically for them. I've already targeted them. That's one good step. And now I'm going to produce a video series, and it's going to be for them. Now, instead of losing money, what can I do? I can go to all my advertisers who are trying to target that group, and I can say, guess what? I'm going to produce content for the group you're trying to reach. I've already segmented the audience for you. I'm going to produce it in a way that they prefer, that they can process and analyze better. Do you want to sponsor that? I'm guessing you have a pretty good reaction to that, a pretty good response. You're no longer losing money on making a bad decision. You are potentially gaining money on something that you can get sponsorship for. All right, so now we've done audience, and now you do your production options. Your big choice is internal versus outsourcing. You remember the limo and the Uber analogy? Those are rentals, right? You're renting a limo for the day. If you go to the point where you are moving the video production in-house, it's kind of like you're buying the limo and hiring the driver. So just think about it in those terms. I think that people kind of wander into in-house video production, and you need to be a little bit more strategic about it. People ask me all the time, what kind of camera should I get? Asking what kind of camera I should get presupposes that you should be producing video in-house. The camera you get depends on your skill set. It depends on the type of video you're going to produce. It depends on a lot of different things. And you have to justify that expense over 3 to 5 years, because that's how long that camera is going to last before it becomes a brick and you have to throw it away. So are you going to produce 30 videos a year? Maybe it makes sense to produce it in-house. Are you going to produce 3? Maybe it doesn't make sense to produce it in-house. Maybe your best bet is to outsource it and don't get into the equipment at all. When you do get into the equipment, people usually think, all I need is a camera. If you want to do good stuff, if you want to do the stuff that Brandon was showing you, you need a camera, you need mics, you need light stands, you need lights, you need cables, you need cards, you need all sorts of stuff. I did a quick list that I think will be made available to you. My list was about $11,000 for a basic, fairly basic, but very good kit. And that's just for interviews. If you want to shoot different types of stuff, you might need different equipment. And that's the point here. The skills and equipment that work for one type of video don't necessarily translate to others. Some of the different types of video you could have marketing, you could have editorial, you could have instructional, you could have lobbying, and you could have e-learning. Well, the person who's really good at e-learning isn't necessarily the same person who can make you a very good marketing video. And that person might not be able to make you a very good editorial video. So if you can think about what type of video you're most likely to make, if you're going to focus mostly on editorial video, then outsource the marketing. That's something to think about. There's all sorts of video formats. Again, this gets into what you're shooting and how you're shooting. There's aerial drones, cinemagraphs, how-to videos, segments with reporters, without reporters. There's a panel discussion like we've got up here. You can have a talk show format or a news show. You can have a conceptual discussion if you're trying to show people how the atom gets split, and you put graphics up to show that. And you can have interviews. And usually when people think about cost-effective video, they're really thinking about interviews. And one of the risks that you run there is that people think, well, I've interviewed people for text stories before, so I know how to interview somebody for video. Well, I was in that same boat about 8 years ago, and I learned the hard way that's not true. A video interview is completely different from a text interview. A video interview is not reality. It looks like reality, but it's performance. When you do a video interview, you need someone to express themselves well because they are the person expressing themselves. If you interview me for a text story and I don't express myself well, no problem. You use your own words to tell my story, and you have that flexibility. When it comes to video, you don't have that flexibility. You've got to rely on me to tell my story well. And I can only tell my story well if I know what you want me to talk about, and if you ask me a good question at the right time. If you ask me a question that's so broad that it takes me 20 minutes to answer, whose fault is that? That's your fault, because you didn't ask me a good question. An interview, a video interview, is necessarily collaborative. As the interviewer, I know the audience, you know your content. We're going to work together to tell a good story. It's very, very different. So a couple quick tips. If you do outsource, I think like Brandon, I would say use a smaller house, not a larger house. I've known organizations that have used really big PR firms, and they spend $50,000 or $100,000 on a video. Maybe there are times when that's needed. I'm not going to say you never need a big PR house, but I think there's a lot of times when you don't need to spend that kind of money. Smaller shops will give you a much lower rate, and I think Brandon had some good information there. And like he said, I would say tell them that you want to save money, and that's okay. Tell them if you have a budget what it is. And as long as you take work off of their plate, that's fair. Now you're reducing the amount of time they have to work. So instead of saying here's 3,000 photos, pick 10, say here's 20 photos, pick 10, they're all good. Here's some text, here's our logo, here's our graphics. Anything that they do not have to create, any text that they don't have to write themselves, you're saving them time, they're glad to pay that, to pass that on to you. If you do production in-house, one of my thoughts for reducing your costs, because this certainly helped me, ask around. You probably have capabilities on your staff that you don't realize. We had people who did music production and composition. I would say, great, let me use one of your songs and I'll give you credit on my next video. And they were fine with that, it was great for them. People who did voiceover, who could help with voiceovers. People who can do drawing or animation or photography. So all of those things can help reduce your costs and your workload up front. And that's it.
And one of the things we should mention at this point is that don't just grab your favorite song off of iTunes and throw it onto your video. It's totally illegal, and BMI and ASCAP will sue you into oblivion. So do not do that.
Yeah. Good point. People have a misconception that internet means free, and that's not the case. Somebody did the work to produce that. They should get their due. And that's it for me. So I guess we go on to questions.
Sure, we'll open it up for questions at this point. Yes, sir.
The staff backing up asked me to ask a couple of questions, one of which is about music. Do you have any recommendations if we don't have such skills on our staff, or we haven't found them yet, for where would be either low cost or free places to find music that could be used that's easy to search and good?
Yeah.
So the question is about music, where to find low or no cost music.
Yeah, believe it or not, there are some low cost and even essentially no cost options out there. You have to be careful about them. If you do internet search for royalty free music, you should find some sites. What I did just to make sure is sometimes these licensing agreements are a little bit confusing. If you have in-house counsel or access to counsel on retainer, just to be sure, I would put whatever the license is for that music, have them take a look at it and make sure that you have the right to use it. I've used stuff that has cost me very little or nothing.
And one other place that I would say to go to, again, you'll have to work out a deal with the artists themselves, but one of the biggest areas for non-signed musicians on the internet is Bandcamp.com. So one thing that you can do is go to Bandcamp.com and you can sort by genre. So let's say you need some ambient music, to go behind something. You can actually sort by ambient and find something you like and actually get in touch with the artists themselves and work out some sort of a deal with them. A lot of artists will be happy to work with you on something like that. But again, they own the copyright to that, so you can't just pull it off there. You need to work with them to do it. But that's one of the ways that the internet has made it easier to source this type of thing, because, like we were saying, you may have somebody on staff. I think both of us play guitar and probably do the music for our own videos. But if you don't know anybody personally, this is a way to find people that do make music, and a lot of the quality is super awesome. I mean, it's very high quality on there. So.
I would back to one other thing to the music. When I came on Amoa, they were paying a yearly fee for a production house, and it was kind of use all you want, but we were going to pay a few $1,000s a year, and we switched from that to just buying music per use. The site we use is audiojungle.net. And it's kind of one of these things, people make music, people upload it, and then you can search and decide whether you want it. And depending on the licenses, some pieces of music are $5. If you're going to use a more advanced license, it may be a little under $100.
And I will add that you should check with, if you're in a larger association, you should check with your meetings department, because a lot of the times your meetings department will already have a licensing agreement with ASCAP or BMI. So maybe you can use some of those bigger songs that you've heard on the radio as part of their agreement. Because when you have a conference, for example, and they're playing music over the intercom, they have to have an agreement in order to be able to do that. So you may be able to work it into that agreement as well. But again, just be careful, be legal, and you should be good to go. Yes, sir.
Hi, one suggestion for that. YouTube actually has a free audio library as well, just to check that out as well. A lot of artists put music on there, and you can find instrumentals just to use for free. Just a suggestion.
Just one other thing to think about. I'm aware of at least one project where you have to be aware of how the licenses affect each other. So there was one project where there was voiceover, there was music, and there was stock footage. And the voiceover license lasted for a certain amount of time. And once that time expired, then the voiceover rights were gone. Well, the music rights lasted as long as the video didn't change. So once the voiceover rights were gone, you had to change the video, which meant the music rights fell apart also. So just be aware that these things can be intertwined. Right?
Any other questions? Yes, sir. Are you going to make the presentation available? Yeah, we will make the presentation available through AMMP's website. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
What kind of camera did you use in the MOA interview?
So I shoot with right before I came to MOA, they invested very heavily in Nikon, in a Nikon DSLR. To my disappointment, once I came on. If I could go back and switch that to Canon, I would, because Canon is obviously the leader in DSLR video, but that was a Nikon D7000. We have two of those, which is the point Patrick and I talked about, the equipment list. Having two, just double that equipment list. Having two of everything on that equipment list is a good idea to shoot for, right? That was shot on a Nikon D7000 with, I think it was a kit lens, probably 3 lights. And when you shoot on a DSLR, DSLRs are notoriously bad for audio. So you're capturing your audio completely separate on a separate device. On a Marantz was the device I was used to capturing that, and it's just like a box you hook up. There's this one right here, Patrick's, that you hook up to a microphone and then pin it on there. Bill.
What kind of, was it just a basic lavalier mic?
It was a Sony lavalier mic, and it wasn't a cheap one. I think they run about $200 or $300. But, the thing about video, if it's going to live online, it doesn't always make sense to have a $500 microphone sometimes to capture your interviews, right? Sometimes, I hate Radio Shack, but a $10 microphone from Radio Shack sometimes will do the job, right?
And I think one of the issues there is you have to be aware of where the final product is going to go. 90% of the time, if you're going online, that's great, but just if there's 10% of the time that you're going to show it at a conference on a giant 40-foot screen, then just be aware that that's where you really want to make sure that you're using the high-end stuff. And the DSLRs, I mean, they have some real advantages in terms of light. They are very sensitive to light, and that's great. In general, they're not well suited to interviews. You can work around them, but they have a time limit. Most of them is about 20 minutes. And then they'll shut themselves off and they get too hot. So if you want to sit there and do an hour-long interview, they're not well suited to that. And then, as Brandon said, you're going to capture the audio separately. That means that you have to sync up the audio and the video later in the production. Now, it's not that hard to do once you know it, but if you're already a little bit intimidated by editing, that's one of the first steps. It's never going to sound right unless you sync it up. And the easiest way to sync up a video is you have the person in front of the video, clap, make sure that they're in front of the lens, and then you've got a visual that you tie to the audio. There's a spike on the audio track, and it's not hard to do once you know how to do it.
Hi, so I do a lot of interviews, and I do a lot of interviews where we actually have to turn them around day of. So it's a lot of, it's more content rather than quality. However, I do have a little studio that I have finally talked them into painting the walls not red, and that's been the biggest achievement that I made. Do you guys have any suggestions of how to make the space just seem a little bit more professional whenever you are moving quickly?
I sympathize with you turning those stories around. We were talking about, I used to work in TV news where you show up at 8 o'clock in the morning and they give you 4 stories you know nothing about, and you come back at 5 o'clock and you have to be an expert on all 4 of those. So I don't miss it, and I sympathize with you. We have a small video studio at MOA that is a room that they were very generous when I first came on board, and they said, tell us what you need to make this work. Luckily, it's a long room, so I can be at one end and shoot towards the other end, and it makes the space seem a little longer, get a little better depth of field, that type of thing. We've set up a system with a rod in the back where you can change backdrops pretty easily. And those can be, sheets, or you can they have some really nice wrinkle-free backdrops that you can change very quickly. I would say backdrop, camera placement, and your lighting. All 3 of those, you could work with all 3 of those to make that work.
Yeah, I had a studio also, and it can be a challenge. One of the most flexible things you can do if you want a lot of options, you get green screen paint. If you've got a flat wall, you paint the wall with the green screen paint. In front of that, you put a backdrop, and that's whatever color backdrop you want. And then they do sell at B&H, it's like a shower curtain that you install on the ceiling, and you have another backdrop. And that way you can pull one backdrop in front of the other really quickly. I think, like Brandon said, you can use the lights. If you throw a plant in there, it doesn't take much because your field of view is typically pretty narrow when you're shooting an interview. And then the last thing is, if you have a gray backdrop, you can turn that into anything. Do you know what a gel is? Yeah. So if you gel your lights, a gel, for those who don't know, use a regular light that's white, and a gel is basically a colored piece of plastic that goes in front, and it makes that light whatever that color is. So a red gel makes the light red. If you have a gray backdrop, a flat backdrop, and you point a red light at it, it becomes red. Whatever color you point at it, it becomes. So that gives you some flexibility. Now, I will tell you, having done a whole lot of them, at some point it doesn't matter what color it is, it gets boring.
B&H is as well.
B&H Photo Video is a website. It's up in New York. They're phenomenal if you do decide to get the gear and produce content in-house. My suggestion for you is sign up for their deal of the day. And every day they'll put something on sale, and sometimes it'll be something you don't care about at all, and sometimes it'll be exactly what you want. This audio recorder goes for about $180. I got it for $100. So I've gotten a lot of photography equipment and other equipment that way. You just kind of keep an eye on it and you'll get a good price.
One of the things I would add to make this a B&H commercial, maybe we'll get free stuff, is one of my favorite things about going to B&H online. It's like a kid, and I can't go to there and not want to buy something. They have a great product review section on almost every product they have has been reviewed by not just people who bought it, but people who have been using it for years, and they'll tell you it lists pros and cons, what it's good for, what it's not so good for. It's incredibly valuable. I use that when looking at equipment to purchase for bnhphoto.com. Is that what it is, bhphoto.com?
And of course, for the real super budget conscious, there's always Craigslist. I mean, photographers are serious about being early adopters for the most part, and so you can find totally last year's completely state-of-the-art cameras and equipment on Craigslist for super giant discounts, and they work totally fine. So obviously, buyer beware, just like any Craigslist deal. I just watched a crazy movie about a horrible Craigslist experience last night. But, go with a friend, and you can find some good deals on there.
along those lines, another site is Adorama, ADORAMA, and they've got some really good deals too. And both of those sites do sell used equipment, and those can be really good deals. And unlike Craigslist, you have a reputable organization that will list for you. They will rate what kind of shape this equipment's in. So you can look at that and say, okay, this is an 8 out of a 10. This is worth my money. That's a 6 out of a 10. Or they'll tell you this doesn't work, but you can use it for parts. So that's another option for the used equipment.
I'm going to make one more plug for video editing software. We had talked about that. One other option, and it's an option I used at a newspaper I was working at before I came to MOA. It's a piece of software called Adobe Premiere Elements. And I got there and they had that, and I thought, oh, geez, what? Because I think I was using Avid before that, and it's about $70 at Walmart, right? It's a very low-end, entry-level piece of software. But there was nothing I wanted to do that I couldn't do with that software. We were doing simple edits for newspaper news stories, but it was very versatile, and it is a great entry level if you're going to stick with Adobe. The learning curve from that to Adobe Premiere Pro, which is much more advanced, it's a lot easier than moving maybe from iMovie or Final Cut to Premiere Pro. It's called Adobe Premiere Elements. I don't think it's on the. I think you have to purchase it. It comes with a lower level Photoshop type of program too. But I looked it up yesterday. It's on their website. You can download it. $69.
Are there any more questions? No? Well, thank you all for coming. Let's thank our speakers, Joe and Patrick and Brandon. And let's thank our sponsors who made this day possible.